Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time. In New Ireland, we have learned from history. We have learned that if you want to provide free education for your children, if you want to give all children an equal opportunity to make something of themselves, you cannot wait on the national government. You must do it yourself. That was a quote by the Governor of New Ireland, Sir Julius Chan. And you might be wondering, New Ireland? Is that just Ireland but a New World Order style name on it or something? And no, it is actually an island. So, to put it in your mind's eye, imagine an island stretched long and thin across the Pacific, shaped like a musket ready to fire. Mountains rise sharply, forests thick with humidity, and villages crouch beside coral reefs that glitter under a fierce sun. At first, this place feels timeless, ancient. The kind of place where the wind seems to whisper secrets too old for any map. For at least 30,000 years, people have moved here, the ancestors of a culture we now call Lapita. They were voyagers of astonishing skill, who sailed in double-hulled canoes from island to island across the Pacific, carrying with them not just tools and fires, but languages, pottery, and memory. From them came the many peoples of Melanesia and Polynesia. On this island, the one we now call New Ireland, their descendants built fishing villages across the coast and garden plots along the slopes, where taro and yam grew beneath towering palms. There are dozens of languages here. Kanwa, Tigak, Nalik, and Mandak, for example. Each tied to land and ancestry, each carrying stories older than any European nation. Memory in this place is not written down, it is sung, carved, and danced. The Malagan ceremony, perhaps the island's greatest cultural treasure, captures this to what they believe is to release their spirits, and then, as the ceremony ends, they are left to decay or are burned. The art is meant to vanish, to live only in the act, not the object. It's a striking concept, that meaning lies not in permanence but in performance, not in possession but in passing on. Here, memory breathes in ritual, not the present. And yet, somewhere under this living culture lies another story, one about power and about names. Because the name New Ireland itself, the name most of the world knows, was never born here. It was imposed. Walk along the coast, where the coral crunches underfoot. Picture the horizon of 1616, when two Dutch traders, Jacob Lemaire and William Schouten, sailed under the flag of the United Provinces and sighted these shores. They were searching for a new route to the Pacific, hoping to evade the Dutch East India Company's monopoly. They mapped the coast hastily, noted the steep mountains and thick forests, and then moved on. They gave it no lasting European name, nor did they even try to understand the people who waved to them from the beaches. For nearly a century, the encounter was only a faint line on a chart. Then, 151 years on, in 1767, a British naval officer named Philip Carteret arrived. He had sailed from England in HMS Swallow, part of a circumnavigation ordered by the Admiralty. The voyage had already been long and brutal. His crew were sick, half-starved, and some nearly blinded from scurvy. When he came upon this long island separated from New Britain by a narrow strait, and there already you see the naming, he decided to name the channel St. George's Channel, and the island itself Nova Hibernia, Latin for New Ireland. Carteret, who had no Irish ties, chose the name almost casually. Ireland, to the English officers of the 18th century, was familiar imperial shorthand, a place already known, already colonised, and already mapped in the British mind. And then, with a few strokes of a pen, the ancient name Latangai vanished from global maps, replaced by something imported from the far side of the world. It's a quiet but telling moment, one of those small acts through which empire remakes the world in their own image. Over the next century, more outsiders came. French navigators under Louis de Bougainville sighted the island in 1768. German missionaries then in the 19th century, and whaling and sandalwood ships soon after. Traders bartered for copra and turtle shell. Catholic and Protestant missions began arriving from the 1870s, both intent on souls and civilization. They built mission houses and schools at Namatanai and Kavieng, and they preached against Malacan rituals, calling them pagan and wasteful. They translated the Gospels into local tongues and taught children to read. Yet for all their zeal, the islanders decided to adapt rather than just surrender. They sent their children to school, and still they carved their masks. They attended Mass, and still whispered the old stories of the sea. By 1884, the imperial scramble for the Pacific was in full swing. Germany, eager not to be left behind, declared a protectorate over the northeastern quarter of New Guinea and its offshore islands, including New Ireland. The island was again rechristened Neumecklenburg, after a northern German duchy near the Baltic. Kavieng became a colonial outpost. German officers and planters arrived, and the copra trade expanded. Indigenous men were conscripted to labour on plantations or in road construction. One of these roads still bears the name of its overseer, Franz Bolominski. A former lieutenant, Bolominski was appointed district officer in 1900. He ordered each village along the east coast to maintain a section of road. Every man was expected to carry coral, gravel and stones on his back to fill the ruts. If the road fell into disrepair, Bolominski punished the entire village. It was grueling work, but it created the Bolominski Highway, which still connects Kavieng and Namatanai today. A century later, lorries and minibuses follow the same path, once walked by men in chains of colonial labour. It is progress built upon endurance. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Australian forces seized German New Guinea, including New Mecklenburg, within weeks. After the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the League of Nations mandated Australia to administer it. The name New Ireland returned, ironically restoring the English version of the old imperial name. From 1921 until 1975, Australian rule continued under the guise of trusteeship. Infrastructure remained minimal. Mission stations did more for education than government did. The Catholic mission at Kavieng built one of the few schools accessible to local children. It is in this context that the modern quote, "In New Ireland we have learned from history, you must do it yourself," which I opened with, rings so true. For generations, communities here have built what governments neglected. During the Second World War, the island itself was occupied by Japanese forces from 1942 to 1945. The invasion came swiftly, and the Allied forces quickly retreated. Villages were commandeered for garrisons. Young men were forced into labour, building airstrips, hauling supplies, or digging trenches. Allied bombers targeted the coast. The forests hid the displaced, and when the war ended, the island was left scarred, but not broken. By the time Papua New Guinea gained independence in 1975, New Ireland was a province, still bearing a colonial name but a voice distinctly its own. Kavieng, the provincial capital, retained its German cathedral and harbour, echoes of past empires. The Malacan traditions, however, persisted, and yet a new colonial force had begun to stir. Not political this time, but economic. In 1982, prospectors discovered gold on Lihir, a small island off New Ireland's coast. What followed was one of the world's largest open-pit gold mines. The Lihir project brought jobs and wealth, but also division. Vast machinery arrived by ship, and villages were displaced. Compensation money flowed, but it was very uneven, and the same tension that had always haunted this island, between outsiders' profits and locals' endurances, repeated itself. The name New Ireland now adorns mining contracts and global stock reports, but beneath it, The soil still holds the memory of Malagan carving and Lapita clay. The anthropologist Richard Parkinson, working here in the late 19th century, wrote of the strange brilliance of the Malagan, a society, he said, where art is memory made flesh. Later scholars like Tim Bayliss Smith studied how local farmers balanced copra trade and subsistence, adapting colonial economies to indigenous rhythms. But even in their careful notes, you sense what's missing. The voices of the people themselves, the laughter, the songs, and the pulse of life that no archive can truly capture. You can almost smell the heat before you see it. Queensland's outback doesn't creep up on you, it hits you full force. Red dust painted against the endless sky, punctuated by clumps of scrub and dry stone, embodies the stark beauty that remains of the forgotten stretches of the Maranoa and Murweh shores. Somewhere out there, in 1,000 square kilometres, sits Tyrconnell, a name that whispers defiance against the ordinary, conjuring an echo not of Australia, but instead of faraway Ireland. Today, only 17 people call Tyrconnell home, a mere handful dotting vast isolation, but once this outpost throbbed with the feverish noise of gold mining and migrant energy. Worlds collide in this single word. Tyrconnell, originally Tyrconnell in Irish, was the name of a kingdom that had ruled Donegal's windswept hills for over a millennium. This was the land of Conall Gulban, son of Niall of the Nine Hostages, one of the legendary High Kings. His descendants, the Canaille Conall, established a dynasty known even beyond Ireland's wild lochs and mountains. The O'Donnell chieftains held fort from their stone fortresses at Donegal towns, resisting English conquest for centuries. In their story, the name Tyrconnell did not simply signify land. It condensed memory, belonging, and a defiant tradition. Perhaps no figure encapsulates that tradition quite like Hugh Roe O'Donnell, known as Red Hugh because Roe comes from Rua, which means red-haired. As a fiery youth, Red Hugh was taken prisoner in Dublin Castle, only to escape in 1592 and return to lead a determined resistance. His daring embodied a spirit that, even when defeated at Kinsale in 1601, refused to yield. In 1607, his brother Rory O'Donnell and others fled Ireland in the famous Flight of the Earls, marking the collapse of Gaelic power. Yet the name endured, carried away in songs and stories, woven into memory, and carried across oceans by generations that left Ireland behind. It was in the aftermath of the Great Famine that Irish migration truly surged towards Australia. Queensland's interior was a world apart, brutal, beautiful, and open to desperate ambition of those fleeing poverty at home. Among the settlers was Irishman John McManus, who christened his pastoral station Tyrconnell Downs. He wasn't making a grand gesture of rebellion or politics, just planting a scrap of Irish names on unfamiliar soil, saying, "This is who we are." Gradually, Tyrconnell became a district, a locality, and a legacy on Australian maps, an Irish name woven into new surroundings. But to glimpse the soul of Tyrconnell, listen for iron and steam. The most famous moment in its history unfolded further north, at the Tyrconnell gold mine on the Hodgkinson goldfield. The gold rush began in 1876, when James Venture Mulligan, one of those restless prospectors who traced fortune wherever quartz glinted, discovered payable gold in the region. Rapidly, claims sprang up across the new reef. By 1877, Redmond and McVeigh had established the Tyrconnell mine, anchoring the community across a 10-head stamp battery that would pound gold-bearing rock into dust. That battery, driven by steam and ingenuity, became a local legend, a symphony of iron pestles dropping rhythmically, crushing quartz and separating gold, using gravity, mercury, and brute strength. By the late 1880s, a shaft had reached depths of 128 metres, yielding thousands of ounces of gold for more than 11,000 tons of rock. But gold mining always balanced reward against risk. Floods often closed the shafts, and capital eventually proved insufficient. Companies rose and fell. When Sydney investors failed, the field nearly vanished, only to roar back into life in 1912 under the management of David Morgan, a Victorian engineer relentless in modernising the site with winding gears, ore bins, compressors, drills, and the ever-present rhythm of the 10-head stamper. By 1914, Tyrconnell bustled anew, machinery thundered, steam whistled at dusk, and miners and blacksmiths, cooks and publicans crowded the field. In just 12 weeks that year, over 1,000 ounces of gold emerged from the battered rock. One can picture the sweat-stained whites of the miners in their sole recorded cricket match in 1917, playing Mount Mulligan under a merciless sun. Yet their humour about liquid fire and poison gas masked gruelling reality. £3 a week if you were lucky, endless breakdown floods, and the constant threat of closure. Still, the true epic of Tyrconnell isn't only found in settlers' struggle. Long before gold fever, and even before McManus, this land belonged to the Jungan people, whose Dreamtime names and stories mapped out each hill and waterhole. In this light, the act of naming Tyrconnell on the green Queensland grasslands carries complex meaning. For the Irish, it became a mark of belonging and a mnemonic shield against exile and erasure. Yet, for the indigenous Australians, it became another wave of colonial overlay, a Donegal name inscribed atop a profoundly older geography, not simply anchoring identity, but also partaking in dispossession. As the decades passed, Tyrconnell reflected wider patterns, and mines shut and the population waned. Fires damaged timberwork and destroyed part of the headframe in 1984, but the stamp battery survived, preserved as a testament to enduring human grit. Today, visitors to the Tyrconnell Outback experience hear the echo of those iron pestles, feel the heat, the grease, and the ghosts of a century past. Guides explain mercury traps, tailings, and the power of invention blended with exhaustion. Just as Tyrconnell's gold faded, in Ireland the name collected its own layers. It resurfaced in English peerage with Jacobite associations. Richard Talbot, Earl of Tyrconnell, championed King James II. By the 19th century, Tyrconnell became the name of a racehorse whose improbable victory led to a renowned whisky label, a single malt brand that still celebrates heritage. In this, Tyrconnell stands more for just a place. It is the vessel of centuries of transformation, resilience, and pride. Places like Tyrconnell and, across the sea, New Ireland and Papua New Guinea, and the other place names we have covered, are clues to a global story. Irish settlers gave their names to cattle stations, gold mines, and towns, not just to preserve memory, but to etch defiance onto unfamiliar landscapes. Each name marks both a continuity and a rupture, laying claim but also erasing what came before. Queensland's maps, dotted with Kilcoy, Donegal, and Tyrconnell, are an archive of dislocation and adaptation. For European settlers, naming became survival, a way to keep stories from vanishing into a blur of migration and empire. For First Nations peoples, each European name became a reminder of loss, a rewriting of ancestral geographies marked by songlines and dreaming tracks. The stamp battery at Tyrconnell still clatters to life during heritage demonstrations. Yet what endures more than the machinery is the layer of voices across time. The clang of the stamper, the laughter and curses of miners, and the long silences of the Jungan. Tyrconnell's legacy is not only the yield of gold, but the persistence of memory, of exile, of belonging, sought of distant plains, and the struggle to remember reverses the power to overwrite. Meanwhile, in Donegal, the songs and stories of Tyrconnell live on, Seanó's singers keeping memory alive, cultural events rekindling pride, and each utterance of Tyrconnell bringing the old back for a moment. This series has taken us This series has taken us from New Ireland in Papua New Guinea to Tipperary Hill in New York, Athlone in South Africa to Tyrconnell in Queensland, each a global thread of Irish heritage. Each of these places carries more than a name. So, when you hear them, know they are more than dots on a map. They are voices from a heritage that lives on, powerful and global. You've been listening to the History and Heritage podcast. I'm Liam Blake. Thank you for travelling with me across oceans, memory and time. Until next time, goodbye.